Hello, I'm Lucian. I'm a writer and I'm sitting in the woods. And this is a story I wrote, and it's called A True Fairy Tale. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who lived all alone at the edge of the woods. He was ever so poor and had neither a mother nor a father to give him a name. Every day, he chopped wood to sell at the market. One day, he went into the woods and he chopped himself a name. "My name is Ash," he said, chopping with his axe at a strong ash tree. Then, because he was lonely, he planted himself an imaginary friend. "Your name is Willow," he told her. The willow took root and sprouted 100 green catkins, which fell to the forest floor, and from them rose an invisible girl. Ash and Willow became the closest of friends and spent all of their days together. Because Willow was imaginary, she couldn't chop or carry wood, even though she wanted to, but Ash didn't mind. He wasn't alone anymore, and even the heaviest of wood felt lighter now that he had someone to pass the time with. One day, when Ash and Willow had finished selling their wares, the town crier made a grand announcement. The king would give a mighty reward to anyone who could give him and his wife a daughter. Now, it was common knowledge that the queen's oldest sister had once asked a brave prince to kill a giant that lived in the woods. But when the prince fought the giant, they stomped and stamped and smashed up the oldest sister's rose garden until it was flat as a pancake and all of the flowers were dead. The queen's middle sister had once asked a witch for help, but when she didn't follow the witch's instructions to the very letter, her firstborn baby arrived with the head of a peacock and a lovely long blue feathery tail to match. The king's wife loved her rose garden and did not much care for peacocks, so it was decreed that neither princes nor witches may apply to help the king and his wife in their quest for a daughter. Ash was neither a witch nor a prince, and the reward was so great that he would never have to work at the market again. And so Ash and Willow made their way to the castle to speak to the king. If the king was a wise man in listening to his wife, it was because his wife was even wiser than he. Ash had never met such a clever woman before, and he marveled at the wisdom she imbued upon the townspeople who had gathered to receive instruction and take up the quest. She wanted a daughter who was the child of no man and no woman. Of course, thought Ash, it would not do to have the girl's parents turn up at the castle and demand to have her back. She wanted a daughter who was wise of the world and the ways of men, but untouched by their glances. Of course, thought Ash, a future queen must be strong of mind as her mother, but as innocent as it is appropriate for a princess to be. She wanted a daughter who had walked the kingdom far and wide, but whose feet had never touched upon the ground. Of course, thought Ash, she wasn't going to make it easy. On the table, the queen laid out many marvelous and magical objects that the people could take to help them on their journeys. There were swords and slings, bottles and bows, silk bags, silver spears and sorceries galore. Everybody rushed for the sharpest weapons and the most magical trinkets and charms. Poor Ash, who was the smallest of them all, was tumbled about in the throng. Only by Willow's encouraging words and quick wits was he able to scramble under the table. By the time it was safe to come out, there was only one measly item remaining. "Up you get," said Willow. "It can't be all that bad. Let's see what there is left." Ash looked at what there was left. It really was that bad. "Yuck," said Ash. "Mushrooms. Not even brightly coloured red or orange ones that might make you grow bigger or smaller. Just 3 normal-looking mushrooms, little and brown with white gills. They smelled like dirt." "Better than no mushrooms," said Willow, and they made their way home. They packed up everything they might need for a quest: a tent to sleep in, some bread and biscuits for a midnight feast, and a big yellow hat for looking mighty fine. Then they headed out into the forest because they both knew that a forest was where all good quests began. After only one night in the woods, Ash was in trouble. He and Willow were in their tent when goblins sprung upon them. "Give us everything you've got," cried the goblins, so Ash gave them all of his bread and biscuits and his big yellow hat. Then the goblins sat about his fire and began to share out his bread. "You going to eat me?" asked Ash. "Of course not," said the goblins. "We're vegetarian, but we will steal your tent." Ash and Willow sat outside as the fire died and all the goblins started to get sleepy in their tent. "I'm hungry," complained Ash. "You could eat the mushrooms," said Willow. Ash had forgotten about the mushrooms. He felt about in his pocket and pulled one out. It still smelled like dirt. He ate it anyway. As soon as Ash put the mushroom in his mouth, Willow made a face. "I can taste it," she said. And then something very strange happened. Ash felt himself become a little lighter, and his eyes became a little clearer, and his legs became a little less tired. Then he noticed Willow. "I can see you," said Ash. He could see her. She wasn't invisible anymore. Now she looked all silvery and see-through like a spectre. Then they realized that the goblins could see her too. "A ghost!" shrieked the leader of the goblins in fright, and they scattered out of the tent, dropping the yellow hat and whooping and wailing off into the night. "Look what they've left behind," said Willow, and she reached out to pick up a big bag of gold, but her hand still went right through it. With this much gold, they wouldn't need the king's reward. After their run-in with the goblins, Ash and Willow decided they might not be built for questing anyway. "Let's head back," said Ash. They packed up their tent and they headed back towards home. After a few hours, it began to rain. "Look," said Willow, pointing a little way down the road, "a duck barn." The duck barn would be warmer than their tent, and drier too. Inside, they found bales of hay and soft white duck feathers. They curled up together because Ash was feeling even colder than usual, and now Willow was feeling cold too for the first ever time. When they woke up, they were in trouble again. "Oh no," said Willow, looking out of the barn door. "I think we slept in a duck barn." "Of course we slept in a duck barn," said Ash. "What's the matter?" Then he looked out of the barn door too. "Oh," said Ash, "that kind of duck barn." The barn was striding over fields, across great rivers and through mighty forests on two enormous orange duck feet. "I think it's headed to the ocean," said Willow. "I think it wants to go for a swim." Then it did something even worse. It lifted up the edges of its red roof to stretch out two enormous white duck wings. Then the duck barn started to fly. Some way across the ocean, they saw two black dots on the horizon. "Help!" shouted Willow. "Help, help!" shouted Ash. The dots drew nearer, and when they finally pulled up alongside the duck barn, Ash and Willow could see that the two flying things were people riding broomsticks. One was a young witch with a big pointy hat, and the other was a handsome young man tethered to the witch by a glowing golden chain. Once the witch and the handsome young man had dismounted from their brooms, Willow asked them if they could take Ash and herself back home, or at the very least, back to dry land. "I'm not sure," said the witch. "I don't know exactly what you are." "I'm an imaginary friend," said Willow, "and a mushroom." That made sense to the witch, but she still wanted payment for letting them ride on her broomstick. Ash told the witch that if she took them to land safely, they would give her the goblin's bag of gold. She was still unsure, but then Willow offered up Ash's lovely yellow hat, and the handsome young man liked it so much that they couldn't say no. Ash got on the broomstick behind the handsome man, and Willow got on the broomstick behind the witch. When the witch began to take off, she and Willow rose easily into the air, but Ash and the handsome man just bobbed about, unable to clear the ground. "Now we're in trouble," said the witch. "You're too heavy to get airborne." So Ash reached into his pocket and he ate the second mushroom. The witch's broomstick sunk a little lower as Ash began to rise upwards. "You're looking a bit peaky," said the witch, and she was right. He was pale and see-through, and he had to think very hard about holding onto the broom. Looking at Willow, he realized that she was now a little less pale than he was, but before he had time to think about it, they sped out of the duck barn and soared high above the waves. The witch told Willow and Ash that the handsome young man was her boyfriend. He was a prince, and because he didn't have any magic of his own, he always needed a charmed toe when they took the brooms out for a spin. They were on their way to a castle on union business to make a formal complaint about witch and prince employment discrimination in the quest sector. Willow told her that she and Ash could walk back from the castle in no time, and wasn't it convenient that they were all going in the same direction? By the time the witch and the handsome prince finally dropped Willow and Ash at the castle, they were exhausted. They had no money left, and they'd practically forgotten all about what it was they'd set out to do in the first place. Quite suddenly, they were greeted by the Queen. The Queen directed the witch and the handsome prince towards the king, who was nervously scrawling out a parchment sending for his lawyer, and then she turned to Ash. "Have you brought me what I asked for?" said the Queen. Ash thought he was in trouble again, and was about to apologize and said no, he hadn't, but then he remembered exactly what it was that the Queen had sent him to find. Ash reached into his pocket, and before Willow could stop him, he ate the final mushroom. Willow felt her feet firmly on the ground for the last time. "It's okay," said Ash, but only she could see or hear him now. "Have you brought me what I asked for?" the Queen said again, but this time she was speaking to the little girl who stood before her. You wanted a daughter who was the child of no man and no woman. I was born from a boy, from a mushroom by a fire, and from a bargain above the sea, and from a sacrifice at the foot of a queen. You wanted a daughter who was wise of the world and the ways of men, but untouched by their glances. I have lived in the mind of a boy who would have been a man. I have seen the trickery of goblins, theft, terror, cold, hope, and return. But as you see me now, I have never before been seen by another. You wanted a daughter who had walked the kingdom far and wide, but whose feet had never trodden on the ground. I have travelled the forests on feet that could not touch the earth. I have travelled the fields and the rivers on the back of a bird. I have travelled the ocean and the towns and the city streets on the empty air and the kindness of a stranger. This royal ground is the first upon which these feet have stood. The queen embraced her daughter, and then she led Princess Willow and her imaginary friend Ash into their brand new home. The end. Thank you for listening to my story.